Welcome to the Binmin podcast. We know that the Christian life can be hard to figure out, but we believe everyone should know their next step for making their spiritual life more important to them. I'm Dad.
I'm Bob.
I'm Dave.
Did you ever struggle with trying to figure out how to be a Christian in the real world? How should you behave at work? What friends should you have? What kind of arts and entertainment should you take in? How should you behave when confronted with a polarized society or face injustice or persecution just because you're a Christian? Well, in our last podcast, we introduced the concept of cultural engagement. Today, we're going to continue part 2 on that topic, and we're going to examine 7 areas of life that every Christian can influence. But first, Bob, can you remind us, what do we mean by cultural engagement?
Mm-hmm. Cultural engagement is giving, creating, and speaking to influence the world around us for good. And we do this in 7 different areas of life, or what we like to call 7 streams of cultural engagement.
Yeah. And Dave, you want to go through those 7 streams real quick?
Yeah, I'll give the first few. So, sort of the first stream that we'd mentioned in the first part of this series was family.
Should we overview before we go through all of them?
Yeah,
Or do you
go
want to
ahead.
start
That might
one
be
by
helpful.
one?
Yeah.
You should do that.
Okay.
Go for it.
Yeah. So just real quick, I'll say up to the 7, and we'll walk through these. So the first one's family. The second is church.
Yep.
The third is workplace. The next is community, and then government and politics, and then education, and finally the arts.
How does Christianity impact the family, first off?
Yep. So maybe just recognizing first that none of us come from a perfect family.
Huh?
What? I was going to say Bob and I
Dad, plug your ears.
subtly shifting on our seats away from the north side of the table. No, just recognizing, that we've all got, like my wife and I as premarital counselor, use the term tapes, right? We've all got these tapes ingrained in our minds, the way we were brought up, and that narrative that we grew up. Recognizing we've all, have had problems and disappointments and all that stuff. We recognize.
We all have 8 tracks. Let me just so that
Well,
we can all be
Dad,
on the same
the resident,
on the same page.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Thanks.
We're MP3s.
Yeah.
But recognizing that by God's power, we've got family units, families being the fundamental unit of humanity. That's kind of the primary, or maybe I would just say the first of the streams for us to engage. And I recognize that dovetailing into that is a conversation even around marriage and how that both reflects, Christ and his bride in that. But I would say, so family being of this first stream, sort of the primary bucket, and then recognizing that marriage in many ways is kind of maybe what that first leg of that stream would look like. More on that later. But
share about also parents and children too.
Oh, okay,
we're just kind of cashing out. What's God's vision for family in the first place? Because even if we have broken families, like there really is a vision God has that He can give us power to make this thing be beautiful. Whether we're still single and looking backward kind of into our existing adult families, or whether we're starting our own.
Yeah, and since you're here, I would say that as parents...
Thank you, by the way.
Yeah, you're welcome.
appreciate that whole existence thing.
Yes. Well,
Shout out to your wife.
I just did all the fun
Hi,
stuff.
Mom. We love you.
Parents are responsible for modeling what it looks like to be a Christian, just at home. Also, inculcating the kids in a Christian worldview, teaching them how to live wisely in a world under God's lordship. We also hope that the children will learn how to correctly love their parents, because as they learn how to love and respect parents, that actually leads them into learning how to love, respect, and honor their Heavenly Father as well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so there's layers to this family piece of cultural engagement where we are influencing the lives of other people. First, the marriage unit, and then parents to children, and then children to their parents. But also, I want to make an important note here, and that is singles also play a role in this. So whether it's our own parents, families, brothers, sisters, cousins, but also single people are knitted together spiritually with other Christians in a way that has created a true spiritual family beyond blood. Like you cannot read the New Testament without reading us called together brothers and sisters, right? And even in some passages, treat them as fathers or treat them as mothers. And so the calling of single people is just as valuable in God's sight, and even how there's a unity amidst our Christian family that can happen in their lives.
Yeah, and that takes us right into the second, which is, what is the Christian's role in the church?
Yeah, well, let me take a stab at a couple observations here. The first is Christians are just flat out called to love and worship God above all else. Yeah. So it's no surprise that we would want to call out, like, so what's the community, the batch of relationships in which we do that and helps push us toward that? Every Christian is responsible to fellow Christians. No one is on their own. And so we can't neglect worshiping together, right? Hebrews chapter 10 even has a verse about that commands us, don't do that, don't forsake, don't run away from assembling with other Christians, because it's so dangerous to our souls. So, and it's helpful for us to be under pastors or under elders, right? And Scripture talks about that too, that we're called to submit to them, make their job a joy. And I think the biggest, one of the most exciting dynamics about this too, and how this relates to cultural engagement, is the church also helps us be on mission together, right? Whether that's, yes, we grow together, right? You want to go to church and engage, like, so we can grow together. But we're also on a huge mission together, right? That stretches from not just helping us cross the street, but also helping us cross the ocean and giving to missions, going on trip. Maybe you're called into mission. So the church encompasses a lot of this Christian community that helps us engage across the pew or the aisle, but also helps us engage across the oceans or across the street as we're on mission together.
Which I appreciate also, because I think, at least personally, my temptation is to think that church is just the thing that refills my love bucket or my spiritual health bucket.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But as you're noting, it's like, intentionality is called and expected from us in this family that we give back to, right?
Yeah.
In this beautiful mosaic, we've talked through what community looks like.
It's like we're a people and we're a people on mission.
That's right. And it's so cool that is a piece of the identity, but I really appreciate that distinction.
So we've covered family, we've covered church. Let's talk about an important one for adults, and that is, how does a Christian influence the workplace?
Yeah. Well, one, if I can take this one, just recognizing that we, by our nature as humans, were made to work, right? Not to get overly biblicize it, but like, okay, look back to the Garden of Eden. Prototypically, we've got Adam and we've got Eve, and they're in a garden and they're doing the work of naming and tending and cultivating, right? Which is a huge encouragement. I think there's a temptation to believe that in an ideal world, we'd all live as kings and queens and never labor a day in our lives. I wouldn't want that lifestyle. So I would say, if that is our intrinsic call to be creators in many ways like God himself is, and to reflect those cultivating and creative faculties, then recognizing we need to do that, but we need to do it in an engaging, attractive way, a way that is excellent in the caliber work that we're doing, and in our work ethic, being exemplary in the way that we handle and manage ourselves and our resources and our development and our relationships in the workplace, doing it so in a compelling way.
Because you're saying we're all called to work.
Yep.
Like flat out, like it's a good thing. Like even Adam and Eve worked, right? Worked 6 days and rest one.
You're going to.
But now the question is, so how do I work?
Yeah.
And then you're saying like there's a way that Christians work both excellently, and we create relationships and stuff, so we even have opportunity so people can see God work in us, and even sometimes we get to speak the gospel in the relationships too.
And as you had noted earlier, and in the part A of this series, recognizing that we don't want to be the Christians that just shut off or take off the Christian hat after Sunday.
Right.
Then you need to recognize that if you have an incredible opportunity because you work in many ways in a pastoral context, right?
Sure, yeah.
And then I look at my life in ministry and go, okay, for me, Monday through Friday, if I'm defining my mission field, my primary place of ministry, it's going to be these men and women that I work with.
Because you're working in a secular workplace.
A secular workplace,
right.
yeah. Yep.
And I would say that given the current culture that we live in, so many people call themselves Christians, and we talked about 4 different ways that people behave in unhealthy cultural engagement.
Yeah, in last episode, yeah.
Yeah, in the last episode. And so this gives us an opportunity to meet persons that are outside the Christian faith and actually show them what genuine Christianity looks like.
Yeah.
And I love that idea. Yeah. Well, so far we've discussed family, church, workplace. Fourth, how can believers make a difference in our community?
A question that I feel like a ton. This is also a really good small group question, I will admit too, because you're basically doing church outside of the walls of the church.
Yeah.
So if you're asking that question in context of community, my short answer is go get out there. Once again, do not relegate your faith to live within the confines of the four walls of your home and your castle. Go to your coffee shop, go to your farmers markets, make relationships, meet your postman, go introduce yourself to the neighbors. This is where I am so blessed by my wife, who blows me away in generosity and hospitality. She is constantly, for those who don't know, and maybe one day she'll make a cameo, my wife is an unbelievably and almost sinfully good baker. Now, as for somebody who struggles with his weight, that is not necessarily at all times a blessing, but what she's good about doing is she'll make huge batches, right? She's trying out a new brown butter cookie recipe.
Oh, man.
She'll make 86 of them instead of making the 5 that we should probably have. So she makes 86 and then uses that as an opportunity and a catalyst to go talk to the neighbors or thank the one who caught one of our dogs when she was running away or who grabbed that package that rolled, out or whatever, right? And she has met more of our neighbors than I have.
And to me, that's also a really cool example of even like what we started with our definition of cultural engagement, which is like giving, and creating and speaking, right, to influence the world. And it's like, well, she's giving because she's buying the butter and stuff like that. So she's kind of using her money, and she's creating these cookies, and she's giving them away things that she's created.
That's true.
And then is also speaking to people. So it's like, man, you're totally engaging in your neighborhood community. Can I add one example to that too? Because you're totally right. It just made me think. I wanted to brag on my wife for a second too, but we did something. So she's a runner. Did that in school and college and stuff like that, but I was not.
Well, you just move at a different pace.
Yeah, that's exactly
We just
right.
wouldn't call it running.
We went walking briskly. And so one of the things we did was in our city, we have one of the biggest Thanksgiving Day races in the country. And so one way to engage with the community, not just to see people, but all of the proceeds of that race, this 5K or whatever it is, go to the homeless in our city. And I was like, cool, well, that's an easy way to engage both giving and showing up in the community. And there's a myriad of ways that if you open your eyes, your neighbors and your community, you can engage. You can do some different levels.
That's right. Which is, I will say, just such an encouragement. I know Pops has always advocated this strongly, is like, if we even talk the philanthropy side, the charity side, like Christians should be at the forefront of that thing, right? Like, once again, not just relegating our resources, time, monetarily, always just to the church, but making marked huge lifts in sides of philanthropy and charity and whatever.
Well, and I would add to that too. I think there are opportunities for us to speak into our community, right? Whether that's writing an opinion for the local newspaper, or whether that's something on social media, right? Your neighborhood board or Facebook group or Instagram or whatever it is.
It's tempting not to be so Christianly
But
sometimes.
oh my goodness,
Yeah, and that is true.
We gotta be
isn't it?
careful.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say is, like, there are plenty of opportunities, praise God, to speak words into our neighborhood and communities. But do we also have actions that are telling people first, hey, I love you, and I care about you and this neighborhood and this community, and I want you to know that even before I speak any words that you might have a hard time to deal with.
That's right, because your reputation will act as an intrinsic lens and a filter on how they're perceiving those words. So if you are known as somebody who is loving and serving your community, then when the words come out, I feel like they hit home a little bit different. But
speaking of civil, I want to change this then to our next topic, which is always a bit of a challenging one, and that is how should Christians behave when it comes to government and politics?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I do think that there's a gift. You may be listening or watching this episode from a variety of different places or a variety of different countries. In our context, when we're situated in a country that has this kind of democratic republic, there is an ability for us to engage in a certain level that as good citizens, like just good citizens engage. If we want what's good and what's true and what's beautiful to happen and what honors God to happen, we actually get a voice, we get a ballot. So it's good to participate and engage or to speak up. But I think one of the things that I would say, even as we do engage, is that we need to also have realistic expectations. What I mean by that is no president, no governor, no senator or representative is going to be a king of kings that solves all problems, resolves all issues, does everything perfectly.
Yes.
Because there really is only one king that's going to bring a kingdom that will complete all kingdoms, where pure justice will happen. All tears will be wiped away. And that's King Jesus.
Yeah.
So we are always, no matter what country we live in, we are more in exile, a part of another kingdom, Jesus' kingdom, than even we are to our own nation.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't mean we disengage. It just
Exactly.
means my fundamental hope is never mostly in a candidate. It's always first in Jesus. And then I figure out how to participate as best I can, knowing some candidates I'll agree with, some I'll disagree with, but I can still trust God no matter who he puts in the positions.
And I think an important point of that is that so many of us, myself included, can be disappointed at times. But that never means that we should not be civil.
Yeah.
We can be civil and still be persuasive and kind and compassionate.
Yeah.
The point is, we should be seen as working for a common good.
That's right.
You know?
That's right. That's right. And as you just even look at that, right, what we're not saying here is use the conversation around politics or government or office as an excuse to bludgeon or be the warrior type Christian we talked about in the first part of this podcast. Instead, what we're saying is, look, we thank God first and foremost that we get an opportunity to participate. And as Bob noted, in this context, in the U.S., the fact that we get an opportunity to vote, to get involved, to engage, to participate in a conversation on social media about, to get to write into our local or state or federal politicians about, is a blessing, but one that we have to be responsible with.
Yeah.
That's huge.
And generous of spirit with, recognizing that when you use it as an opportunity to bludgeon others, I don't think Christ is glorified. But when you do it to create a conversation around the grander moving pieces, both in our society at large and a larger conversation around the spiritual world, I think that's a really special place. More on that later, but I just wanted to, say what we're not saying and say what we are saying. What we're not saying is jump into politics and say Jesus would vote for X, because we don't know who Jesus would vote for X, right? But instead recognizing that it is a gift, but a huge opportunity to engage our culture, obviously. I mean, you can't drive down a highway in the U.S. without seeing.
And it feels like the takeaway from both of you guys, for me on this, is to add to your point, if you're going to engage, be civil.
Yes.
And Dave, to your point, if you're going to engage, be responsible. Take responsibility for whatever it is you communicate, because you can't just throw things out there.
That's right.
Those are good notes to me.
Sixth, let's talk a little bit about education.
Yeah.
Such an important and such a gift in the United States. How do you all feel that we should, as Christians, be involved in education?
Yeah. Well, it can be a tricky conversation at times, because for anyone who's attended a school, whether that is a public school or a university or something in between, it does feel, I wonder, your feedback, it does feel like there's an intrinsic feeling about Christianity relatively being looked down on. It's non-academic, and if you feel like you're a Christian who's viewed as non-academic, then you shouldn't you just shouldn't participate. No, what you should do is engage the fire out of it. Go and be excellent, but we recognize that there's a lot of dynamics here, right? So you might be a student here, you could be an educator, you could be a parent of a student, you could be on the parent-teacher organization, you could be a politician who's involved in policy making that's going to affect education. You could be there's a lot of dynamics is the point. And being responsible and reflecting Christ and engaging well in those conversations is what we want to encourage.
Would you say anything specifically to students?
I would say primarily to students, recognize that your entire worth and your image and your soul's weight isn't in what your GPA is.
Yeah.
And that's a duh to most people, but I think that there is a temptation that if you look at this and go, well, hey, David Binmin said go and just crush it, be the best student. Well, yeah, like for what you're called to, do your absolute best.
Absolutely.
Honor the Lord with what you've got in front of you, but recognizing that there needs to maintain a strong level of humility and of personal sacrifice so that your spiritual health never degrades.
I agree with that so much. Yeah.
and compromise in pursuit of academic excellence. Now, I'm sitting talking to two people who have done incredibly well in academics. You both have more degrees than I have letters in my name. And I'm appreciative, though, of the way that you pursued excellence, almost as a chit and a way to build credibility, right? Like, Dad, you as a physician for 35 years, you had a certain opportunity and a certain platform that may not be afforded, you know, without one in a certain context, especially as a physician. Bob as a pastor and having gotten the MDiv and gone to a killer school, right? Like, that does earn you an opportunity to engage. And so all that to say, I think that there's a sobriety. We need to remember that we have responsibility, that when you do get educated and get some more letters after your name with a comma, it doesn't mean that you now get to go bludgeon people because you're smarter.
Well, I was going to actually use that piece. Did you want to chime in on that?
Well, no, but one of the things that we've all had a conversation, you know, off camera about so many times, and why don't you speak to that, if you don't mind? As you're approaching your academics, you're in school, you're at Oxford. Are you Mr. Big Britches? Are you totally involved in just your studies? How do you maintain that humility?
Well, I mean, I think all I was going to say was like, I think anytime anyone is in a school environment, whether it's elementary school through college through graduate school, whatever, you know, whatever level or however good you think that you are at school, to me, making sure that you're investing in your time with the Lord, you know, your devotional life with the Lord, your private time with the Lord is going to form you in a way. And probably a second piece to that, what we would call pre-evangelism or apologetics, knowing more about your faith so you can interact with people, both with the gospel and with issues that might be blockades to people in the gospel.
Yeah, that's good.
I feel like investing in your personal spiritual disciplines and investing in pre-evangelism really become these two arms that impress you both to do your academic work well and also press you to engage other people well, because you're in a people context in school. And so that plays out with how we're talking about cultural engagement. Cultural engagement is both what you kind of create, right? You're creating a paper, you're creating a test or a quiz, but it's also what the relationships, how you pour into the relationships.
That's right.
So, and there's obviously more resources, as you'll see on Binmin, about spiritual disciplines and about pre-evangelism. So it's kind of a plug for that.
Shameless plug. Come check out our website.
But yeah, so no matter where you feel like you are at on the grade scale of how much you love education or not, if you're in it or you're invested in it, it's a sweet opportunity to listen to the Lord and just be light there.
Yeah, and that really, I loved every single point that you made there. Thank you. I want to take the last one, which was the arts. Now, both of you, in different ways, are really embedded in the arts. So why don't you speak briefly to that as we kind of wind up things today? How do you feel and how do you see young adults especially getting involved in the arts?
Yeah, man, what an opportunity we have. Like, that Christians have had for hundreds of years to engage in the arts. And by the arts, there's multiple levels to this, right? Creating things. By this, I kind of just mean generally creating things that are beautiful, that are truthful, that are good, right? Whether that's visual art, whether that's design, whether that's music, whether that's writing, whether that's performance, whether that's other ways to create. We have a huge opportunity here. Let me maybe just let you, Dave, speak into that. So what would you say to a Christian who says, what does it mean for me to culturally engage in the arts?
Right. Well, my first thought immediately goes to this thing I have in my hand, which, if you're only listening, is a smartphone, and recognizing that in this day and age, we now have devices that can make us a photographer or a videographer overnight. You can disseminate that across social media, but I think bigger questions arise quickly like, okay, just because you can, should you? And if you are, is what you're making good, true, and beautiful? Does it point people, both believers and non, to Christ and His goodness? I mean, you know, we've all read a good amount of Calvin, and I think either in one of the institutes, right, he says things like, I look to even nature and the beauty around me, and I see, you know, this red bird, and it reminds me of the red blood of Christ that was spilled for me, right? There's a lens that we can appropriate and interpret this world.
And it's not that everything has to be allegory.
No.
Right? Like the difference between Tolkien and Lewis.
Yeah,
you don't have to write out, like, make good and true and beautiful things.
Go paint Jesus. Yeah, absolutely. take a picture, take a video, create whatever the arts are. I just think that there is I think that there's an accountability that isn't talked about enough, particularly on the part of Christians, whether that's in an exhibition hall or it's on an Instagram with 100,000 followers, right? Is recognizing that some of the most compelling Christian artists that I follow on social media aren't the ones who are posting beautiful calligraphic scripture that they've drawn out. It's most of them are photographers. Where I look and I am literally taken. I hit pause on life for a second because I'm in awe of the majestic whatever that this person photographed. Right.
And I almost wonder if it's to make it overly simple. Ask myself the question, like, does this help people in whatever even gentle way point them toward God?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm sort of hearing another episode just...
It's brewing. We got to stop.
Yeah.
We get on soapboxes so easily.
Yeah.
This is why we need notes and discipline.
Yes. So let's finish this podcast with the same question we always try to finish our podcast with, and that is, so what? Why does cultural engagement even matter? Bob, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, if you're like me listening to this episode, you might be thinking to yourself, I'm doing a terrible job at most of these cultural streams. Like, I'm listening to what Dave is saying or whoever and just going, ugh, man, I'm not doing anything near that. Like, I would eat some of those cookies that Dave's wife would give, but that's about the only part that I really feel like I'm participating in right now. Man, if you feel that way, or frankly, if you, on a kind of a serious note, like if you feel, man, nobody would even really know I'm a Christian if they just looked how I interacted in my community or looked at how I interacted in my job or at school. Well, the good news is that all of us really do have a next step constantly. We just have a next step to follow the Lord. And your next step might be just to pick one of these 7 streams and what you want to improve in like this next month and take one step. You know, start giving to your church.
That's right.
On mission, right? Ask someone who lives near you out for coffee and just like start a relationship, right? Start to engage in an issue that's facing our world that you care about, right? Just one step this month will help you kind of start taking movement on this. Like, why does this really matter? How can I start living this?
That's right. That's right. And we do recognize that in this conversation, there may be a tendency towards a little bit of anxiousness and a little bit of fear because what especially what you're advocating for is this activity, this next step. Go out and be doing the work, right? And we know that some of these elements we've covered today, some of these streams may have what feel like polarizing characteristics, right? Around politics or around the way we engage in arts. But just remember, when you approach this humbly and prayerfully, seeking to bring God glory in this conversation, you really can't go wrong. So just take advantage of these opportunities, recognizing that many people don't have that many experiences with true, genuine believers, that in most of these contexts, you know, even if they are the ones that are sort of polarizing, the best way to turn an enemy into a friend is by being loving, being gracious, destroying pride, and instead putting in place true, genuine connection and love for that person in their best interest. And I think if we are advocating to understanding other people's beliefs and where they're coming from, and we're advocating for creating good, true, and genuine relationships, that we're adopting really good skills in pre-evangelism so that we can communicate the truth of Christ in compelling ways, then I think what we do well is engage this world around us in whatever context you find yourself in, recognizing that you don't have to have a certain degree to go and talk to a certain type of person at a certain time, but instead taking captive the community that you are in right now, today. Not necessarily in 6 months ago, so I appreciate your encouragement a ton to go, okay, my wife and I are probably going to go to our local coffee shop in about 3 hours.
Good.
I wonder if there's an opportunity to talk to somebody about Jesus.
Amen. Thank you both, guys. This has been wonderful. And thank you for listening to the Binmin podcast, where we believe everyone should know their next step for making their spiritual life more important to them. Binmin is a resource ministry to help you discover those next steps.
Yeah. So if you are so moved, like this video, follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to subscribe and check us out on socials
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We look forward to next time. God bless.